Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard Dr. Israr's presentation on Islam, Imaan and Jihad. And now the floor is open for discussion.
I think that we should thank Dr. Israr because he was able to move us from the realm of theology to ideology. And that's very significant. I think that this is the square that we have to focus on when we speak about the interaction between Islam and society or Islam and history. Because perhaps ideology is a better term than theology in this type of discourse. And I have two major questions in this regard. The first question concerns the whole idea of takfir, declaring somebody an infidel. And as you well know, this kind of issue is not new in Islamic thought. It can be traced to the first split within Islam between Ali and Muawiyah and takfir and all of that. And later on it materialized in the whole major theological debate and philosophical debate between the Mu'tazilas and the Ash'arites in the classical phase of Islam. But nowadays it is a very sensitive issue in many Muslim countries. As you well know, in the 1970s in Egypt there was the takfir and hijra community, people who declared the whole society to be a kafir, the whole Muslim society of Egypt to be a kafir. And people trace those ideas to Sayyid Qutb in Egypt and Allama Maududi in India, Pakistan. And of course there are major traces of such ideas. Now the question is, who does have the authority from an Islamic perspective? Does any human being or institution have an authority to declare somebody or something, such as an institution, a kafir, an infidel?
Firstly, as I told, if we don't know anything else about a person, and he testifies that there is no God except Allah and Muhammad is his slave and messenger, he is a Muslim. But if then we come later on, we come to know that he doesn't believe in Quran, for example, something which is most basic for Iman, then we declare him an infidel and kafir. In the case about Qadianis and Baha'is, that they don't accept Muhammad as the last prophet, and they think that the institution of prophethood and messengerhood is continuing. So declare someone to be a kafir infidel is separate from accepting someone as a Muslim. If we don't know anything about him, he is testifying he is a Muslim. But if we come to know that he believes in something which is just absolutely contrary to Islamic belief, then we declare him as infidel. In an Islamic state, it's only the state which can declare anybody or any sect or any group of people as infidel. But during the colonial rule, when there was no Islamic state, this function was taken up by the ulama. But as bad luck would have it, the ulama then used this sword against each other also, with little differences in theology and in the fiqh and law and this and so that is the sad part of it. But ulama, if they have a consensus about a group that they are not Muslims, they are outside the pale of Islam, then we have to admit it. This thing happened in Pakistan about Qadianis. The ulama, all sects, all Shias, Sunnis, and Barelvis, and Deobandis, and Ahl Hadith, Zahiris, Jamaat-e-Islami, there was a complete consensus that they are outside Islam. And then the government also took this step. Mr. Bhutto, he got it decided by the parliament. And the Qadianis were given full opportunity to present their case. But then the committee of the parliament decided, no, they are outside Islam.
Now, I think that what you have essentially talked about is what we call, in Christian theology at least, the relationship between violence and the sacred. And I'm really delighted that
violence and
the sacred, Al-Qudsiyya, the sacred. And I'm really delighted that you have explained that from an Islamic perspective. However, I don't see any major difference between your ideas on the connection between jihad and violence or offensive Islam, so to speak, in your own terms, and between the ideas of somebody like Bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri. The only difference I see is a matter of tactic, that perhaps you are much more tactical than they are.
No.
But in an essential theological justification of jihad, I don't see a big...
No, I'm sorry, you have misunderstood me.
Yes.
They have not passed through those 8 stages.
Yeah, but these stages
Have
are
they made
tactical
Dawa?
stages.
Have they organized people? Have they purified their souls? Whatever Bin Laden is doing or the other, extremist groups, they are showing their anger only, just angry children, giving vent to their anger because America is supporting Israel and it has gone out of way to support the Zionism. So they are angry, that's all. But this is not jihad fi sabilillah, not at all. My description is absolutely different. When the Russian armies entered Afghanistan and there was a resistance, there was all, in the whole Muslim world, jihad, jihad, jihad. And then Bin Laden was also bringing Arabs,
Yes.
and Omar Abdul Rahman was also doing the same thing. Abdullah Azam was also doing the same thing. I never accepted it to be jihad fi sabilillah, never. I said this is jihad fi sabilil hurriya, and this is permissible in Islam. And if you lay down your life for that, you are a martyr. But it is not jihad fi sabilillah. Jihad fi sabilillah has to pass through those stages. The prophetic, model. But then, when Taliban came, and they established some laws were enforced of Islam, and there was all peace and tranquility in 90% area of Afghanistan. And one command of Mullah Umar and this cultivation of poppy, 0. Then we said, okay, now these people, they are the rebellions, the Northern Alliance, and the war against them is fi sabilillah. In the same way, I never accepted that whatever is going on in Kashmir is jihad fi sabilillah. Never. It is also jihad for freedom, for self-determination, etc., etc. So this is the main point. We have used this word mistakenly, in wrong sense, and we are actually to blame to bring bad name to jihad.
You have blown it out of proportion.
So this was a follow-up to the first question. What's the second question?
That's the second question.
Okay.
You will agree that different Muslim societies or different Islamic movements will have to determine at what particular stage they are in on the basis of analysis of the objective conditions of their own societies. In other words, different Islamic societies and different Islamic movements can be at different stages of resistance. You will also agree that it is possible that Islamic movements can make mistakes in terms of strategic choices or the objective determination where they are right now. Like 1950s, the Muslim Brotherhood thought in Egypt that they have reached a stage of qital and they started indulging in violence, which probably in the view of many observers was a premature kind of thing. Two questions. One question is that, do you consider the possibility that these strategic or tactical mistakes can be made?
Yes, definitely. But they can be committed.
And they are ijtihadic mistakes.
Yes, ijtihadic mistakes. They will give no harm to the people in the hereafter. But here in this world, the movement will fail. The decision of converting from passive resistance to active resistance in the case of the life of Prophet was done by Allah.
Now, as the head of an organized Islamic movement yourself, what is, in your view, what is the particular state at which you find yourself? Passive resistance, active resistance, qital fi sabilillah. You said that you do not approve of qital fi sabilillah because it is not feasible. My question is, if it becomes feasible,
if it is feasible, it is permissible.
If you said because arms are not available to the masses, if arms become available to the masses, my question is the issue of the legitimacy of violence.
Yes, this qital fi sabilillah is legitimate, is halal, is permissible till the end of this world. But in the given conditions, the objective conditions, generally speaking, it's not feasible.
And at what stage you find your movement?
My movement actually is in the very beginning stage. Dawa, purification of selves, organization. These three stages go hand in hand, side by side. Now the passive resistance in our case is not coming from outside. It's on the level of society. When we say anybody who joins us has to have halal, only permissible means of earning, and he has to give up those things which are forbidden. Now there is a struggle in the family. Even his own wife and children may be against him. We were having better times before, now we are hard. So if the segregation of sexes in parda and wheel, it is established, you may be an outcast from your relatives. So this is the passive resistance which we are meeting at this time. We are not strong enough in the eyes of the government that they suppress us. But generally speaking, the Tanzeem-e-Islami is not at that level up till now.
I want to thank you again for being so frank, and I'll ask you a question. I'll ask you two questions, and I'll also try to be frank. The first is a minor question. In the struggle to convince, you mentioned that there should be dialogue. I think you said with Christians, with Baha'is, and with others. So my question is, what about dialogue with Jews, especially following the discussion that we had this morning? That's my minor question. My major question...
Let me answer the minor
Yes,
question.
fine. All right.
The dialogue with Jews is a must for Muslims.
Oh, that's okay.
قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَىٰ كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ. Say, O Muhammad, O the people of the book, the Jews and Christians, come, we should meet at something which is common between us. Allah na'budu illallah, that we shouldn't worship anybody, anything except Allah. So that is the call.
All right, fine. That's a clear answer. Now, my next question has to do with what you've said about the levels of jihad, and I want to focus for a moment upon Palestine, Israel. Palestine. Now, one thing I think that we would definitely agree upon, there in that struggle, we have an oppressor and we have the oppressed. The Palestinians are the oppressed, and the Israeli government from the beginning of the state has been the oppressor. That may not be 100%, but that is well over 90% of the situation of the conflict. So that is clear. It also is clear, is it not, that Palestinians have, perhaps not sufficiently yet, but Palestinians have attempted to and have gone through the first two stages. There has been passive resistance. That is to say, they've shown much patience. And we can say, can we not, that since December of 1987, when we had the first intifada, we have gone to your second stage of resistance that is still non-violent mostly, but is an advance from the first stage, and actually for some time, limited time, produce some positive results. So now I come to this question that's really twofold. One, do you think Palestinians, most of whom anyway are Muslims, let's say 85, 87% are Muslims, Do you think that now is the time, as some of them think, that they should go to the resistance which is more violent resistance? This is, of course, based upon an assumption that I think we can make, that the Israeli government is, in the foreseeable future and probably beyond the foreseeable future, not going to change the way it is operated. So, should Palestinians go to the more violent resistance stage? And then the second part of that question is, when Palestinians talk about the kind of solution that they would like, which they do talk about, which they should talk about, should they talk about an Islamic state in all of Palestine, Israel? And if indeed that is the answer, that it should be an Islamic state, then my question is, does that mean, which I infer it would mean from what you had said, that then if that did hypothetically come into existence, that the 5.2 million Jews who presently are there, those Jews might be granted human rights up to a certain point, but not be granted political rights and not have the right to engage politically in the governance of that Islamic state?
First of all, brother, I think the conflict in Palestine is not ideological. It's national. Muslims have become a nation. They themselves don't practice Islam. And PLO was basically a secular organization. It had nothing to do with Islam. So this is absolutely a different question and a different background. We can say that they are fighting for their right, yes, and I said it's okay to get the rights. Now secondly, if an Islamic state is established, supposedly, in Palestine, the whole of it, then the Jews will be a minority over there. They will have the right to live there, to earn there. They will have full religious freedom. Their synagogues will be protected more than the mosques. You know, because in one ayah of Surah Al-Hajj, Allah has mentioned synagogues and churches and masajid, but masajid came last. So, لَهُدِّمَتْ صَوَامِعُ وَبِيعٌ وَصَلَوَاتٌ وَمَسَاجِدُ يُذْكَرُ فِيهِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ كَثِيرًا. So all these, synagogues and churches, and then masajid also.
I wonder how you would feel about the following. From 1917 to 1989, the chief organization that struggled against oppression were the Marxists, mainly from Russia. And since that time, since 1989, the Islamic peoples, if I can call them that, have taken up the cudgels against Western capitalism. And the way you formulated your final 3 stages, I wasn't quite sure whether I was listening to somebody who was a Marxist or as an Islamicist. Because I have been listening to this discourse on struggle against oppression for many years. And to talk about objective conditions is exactly what the old Marxists used to talk about. If you read Mao's military writings, for instance, which is the final stage of your 3 stages, or you read Ho Chi Minh, you're talking the same language. And so it seems to me I would be very interested to know how you respond to this question.
If you can remember, I mentioned Marxism before Islam. That the example is Marxism and communism, an ideology and a system of life being based on that ideology. So actually this revolutionary movement and the only example of ideological state was this communist state. It was not a nation state. Although in the later stages it became Russian nationalism as the Chinese, accused them. But in the beginning it was a revolution. And revolution is a revolution. The stages will be the same.
My question is along these lines that in this very learned presentation, what I gather is this, that some kind of an approach which is for the majoritarian group. We are talking about an Islamic state, and within that the example of Qadianis or things like that. What do you think would be the posture of Muslims for pursuit of justice in United States or in contemporary India? What kind of jihad kind of approach do we visualize? Because really speaking, I'm looking at it also from my own perspective.
Yes, brother. The second stage of jihad will be everywhere where there's even a single Muslim. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam started his Dawa, his invitation towards the way of Allah, when he was all alone in the whole world. What to speak of the Arabian Peninsula? He started it. People started joining him, and in due course of time, he had the power, he had that much strength with him that he challenged the system. So we have to continue the Dawa, this calling, Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati, Dawa towards Islam in America, in India, yes, everywhere. But in the Muslim countries, we think there is more chance that people can gather together and establish the Islamic State. Although this hope is now diminishing day by day, but still we are doing it here. But in America, in India, we have to be the propagators of Islam, especially the social justice that Islam provides.
So basically my purpose here is to look at the possibility of an emerging paradigm which can be more universal and which can be applicable to humanity at large, create some kind of a social model. That's where I'm trying to go.
Social, political also.
Yeah, socio-political, politico-economic model,
Yes.
Socio-politico-economic spiritual model, spiritualistic model. Because I think individually each one possibly will be guided by their own sets of spiritual inclination and spiritual evolution. So therefore I think taking the totality of the human situation at an individual level and at the subsets of society, how do we bring it collectively together? I think that's where I'm trying to go with this. And I'll keep on coming back to that maybe.
Brother, as I said, truth is one.
Yes, thank you.
Not everything is true. So we have to propagate the truth and call people to accept the truth.
I've got two questions as well. Lots of people are asking two questions this afternoon. Not three, just two. The first question is a theological one. Do you think a Muslim knows when they move to the second state, i.e. an Iman, and not just
Islam. Yes.
Islam? Do you think a Muslim can know that they're there and be confident that they have authentic faith, or is it something that you always trust you have and hope you have?
No. There are ahadith, tradition of the Prophet, we tell, when this happens, then you are a mu'min. When this thing happens, you are a mu'min. So there are signs of real Iman. Yes.
Okay.
And anybody can say, yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
This is a matter of self-assessment. Self-x-raying. You can't pronounce a judgment about others.
Thank you. My second question is to do with returning to the whole issue of the stages from passive resistance to active resistance and then to just aggression. You invoked Gandhi as an example of somebody who did stages 1 and 2. But of course the big difference is that Gandhi believed that 1 and 2 were all he was allowed to do because of his commitment to non-injury and to his commitment that taking of life, even in a just cause, is wrong. And of course there are many Christians, well not many, but there are some Christians, you know, Jesus Christ almost certainly, much of the early church for the first 300 years, and continuing groups like the Mennonites and the Quakers and Martin Luther King Jr., who've also stressed that in the end 1 and 2 is where you should stop, because life is sacred, the taking of life is sacred, and is therefore wrong. And once you start killing, it leads to revenge and counter-revenge and the cycle of violence. And you can never be sure that goodness comes out of it. And therefore, isn't there a big difference between what you're advocating and what people like Gandhi advocated? And that is, in the end...
Gandhi, you mean?
Gandhi, yeah.
Yes.
In the end, both Gandhi and Martin Luther King and certain strands of Christianity who are committed to pacifism stop at 1 and 2 and would think it always wrong to go to number 3.
No, no. He would have gone to number 3 if there was need. These were the stages. Non-violent, non-cooperation. Not even disobedience. It was only non-cooperation. We are not going to wear your clothes. That's all. Then the non-violent disobedience, civil disobedience, breaking the law. If these were good days for the Britishers, they would never have left India. Neither they killed anybody who was striving for freedom, nor the people killed any Englishman. And they were going and they were in haste to go. They had planned in 1948 to free India. But then 1 year earlier they went. So had the third stage come, Gandhi would have gone challenging the system, and the system can never change without bloodshed. We have to be very simple. No system can be changed. Religion can be changed. The creed, the dogma, it can be changed. People can become Christians. People can become Buddhists. But to establish a politico-socio-economic order, well, that has to entail some bloodshed. That is why Muhammad, he took sword in his hand. Otherwise, it would have been a missionary type of work only. Deen would not have been established.
I would like to take the issue of the intelligentsia, the intellectual elite that you referred to in passing in your talk. And you made a distinction between the intellectual elite and the masses. I'm not concerned about this distinction at the moment, but what I'm concerned about is the intellectual elite in the Muslim world. Of course, the intelligentsia are not homogeneous. One can define them in so many different ways. But I think that in the Muslim world, one major composition of the intelligentsia is the religious intelligentsia. And in a country like Iran, we said that in a sociological sense, not in a normative sense, I think that Iran is the only example I can think of in the 21st century where religious intelligentsia are in charge. They have the power. Of course, there are major conflicts between certain forces within Iranian society. But here the ulama are in power. But that's the only example I can think of. I don't think this is the case in the Sudan or the case in Malaysia or Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, although some of these countries are referred to sometimes as Muslim countries. In other Muslim countries, take the example of Egypt. In Egypt, we have the major institution of Al-Azhar, which is a respected Islamic theological institution, especially in the Sunni world. And if you look at the Azhar ulama, by and large, nowadays, the majority do not oppose the status quo. On the contrary, they are the major supporters of the status quo. So in that sense, they are not absent from social political forces within society. They do support the status quo. And the ones who don't are the jihadis or the people who belong to the Jama'ah Islamiyah. When I was in Egypt 2 days ago, I came to realize for the first time that there are 15,000 members of Jama'at al-Islamiyah in prison in Egypt. 15,000, a large number. Most of them are young people, leaders, intellectuals in a religious sense. Whereas the high ulama of Egypt, at least most of them, are in support of the status quo, which is very oppressive, extremely oppressive. And they justify the status quo in Islamic terms. And this is true to a large extent also in Saudi Arabia with a great number of the ulama. I know that there's a split between the ulama in Saudi Arabia. Some of them oppose the status quo, but the majority, one would say, are for the status quo. Now, how would you characterize the situation here in Pakistan? Would you say that the majority of the ulama are for the status quo or against the status quo?
It's a difficult question, but in the first instance, I disagree with you. The ulama don't belong to the intelligentsia or the intellectual elite. They are learned people, learned in the religious sciences only.
Yeah, but that's a production of knowledge.
No,
but anyway.
But you know, it's restricted. Scope is restricted.
That's not restricted.
Yes.
The ulama are in touch with the masses, and that's not restricted at all.
No, the scope is restricted.
Yeah.
They are in touch with the masses because they are there in the mosques. And every seventh day there is a meeting, there is a public gathering, and they have the contact with them. But intellectuals means those people who obey their intellect first of all, philosophical bent, and you know they want to have this intellectual thirst satisfied. Those are the intellectuals. And in the Muslim world, it's very sad that the actual intellectual elite is secular. And to Islamize them is the biggest challenge for the Islamic movements.
Well, I disagree with this kind of character. I think that the religious elite are a major part of the intellectual elite. They are not the only part, but they are a major side, a major layer of the intellectual elite in contemporary.
We can agree to disagree.
Yes, that's true.
If I am mistaken, please forgive me. You said that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was led an offensive jihad. Yes. Okay. Can you give examples?
Example is that
with isolating from the conditions and of the time, because
you know, brother, after Hijrah,
yeah,
we can't prove there was any move from the Meccan side, from the Mushrikeen of Makkah.
All the wars were around Medina.
What? No. What happened is that Muhammad ﷺ took only 6 months to consolidate his position at Medina. He built the mosque, number one. Then Muakhat, brotherhood between the immigrants or the Muhajirs and the Ansars. And thirdly, a joint pact of defense of Medina with the Jewish tribes, 3 tribes. He consolidated his position here, and from the 7th month, he started sending small groups, guerrilla groups, threatening the caravan route which was going from Mecca and passing near Medina from Badr and going to Syria, or the caravan route going to Yemen through Taif. There are 8 expeditions. In 4 of them, Muhammad himself took part. They are called Ghazawat. And the other 4 are Saraya.
Before their attack, before the attack of
Badr.
Medina people.
Yes. And there was no move whatsoever from the Makki side. Well, they wanted to go and attack Medina and finish this job.
I mean, what I said, isolating from the condition, because each time they used to receive information that they are going to attack Medina. That's why. Yeah, that's why he did. Yeah, that's why he did.
No, you can't prove.
Peace treaty with Jewish and even with
These 8
Christians.
expeditions, you cannot prove any one of them was based upon any information coming from.
I think this point needs to be analyzed very deeply, because it is. I feel very much doubt that in Prophet's life there was offensive jihad to any. I mean, if we study very deeply that he was all in defensive cases, because this
Well, the conquest of Mecca was a form of offensive jihad.
Are you,
Oh no.
Sir, are you familiar with Fazl Rahman's argument that for each single battle, we do not need to establish a point of provocation from the Meccans. What we need to establish is the overall offensive context that the Quraysh of Makkah had established, to which Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to respond. And that's the argument which Fazl Rahman has built.
Actually, there is no proof that the Makki people were planning some attack of Medina. As I was saying, there were hawks and doves. The hawks, Abu Jahl, Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayyad, they wanted to attack. But there were doves who wanted, so they have gone from here. And one person, Utbah ibn Rabi'a, he said that now leave Muhammad and the rest of the Arab world. Now, if Muhammad is eliminated by the rest of the Arab world, this thing will happen without yourself soiling your swords with the blood of your brothers. Who are they? They are from Quraysh. And if Muhammad can subdue the whole of Arabia, it will be to our gain. He is a Qarshi. So a Qarshi empire will be established. So this was the argument going on. But when that thing happened, when the caravan was going to Syria under the leadership of Abu Sufyan, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his men chased it, but it escaped. When it was coming back, he sent an SOS message to Makkah. I fear that Muhammad and his people, sallallahu alaihi wasallam and radiyallahu ta'ala, they will attack us. So send some help. And from the other side, from Nakhla is a place between Makkah and Taif. There the Prophet had sent 11 people. And the command was stay there and keep us informed of the movement of the Makki people. There happened a skirmish. One of the mushrikeen of Makkah was killed by Muslims. 2 were made prisoners and they brought the booty also. The Prophet said, I had not commanded you to fight, but he didn't take any action also. Now this person who had escaped, he went to Makkah and he raised hue and cry. The people of Muhammad have killed our person. These 2 reasons, were there for the preparation of 1,000 strong army. The provocation was from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have to be very clear regarding this. This is a very important issue of the Sirah.
I want you to consider the consequences of the position you are taking. And here is how I see it. If we articulate the jihadic ideology as an offensive ideology, and we say to the world that we have not yet reached the stage at which we can undertake violence, take up arms against the forces that are opposed to Islam. We are at stage 1 or stage 2, but definitely a time will come when we will engage in offensive jihad against the rest of the world. Then the rest of the world is perfectly legitimate, is justified in taking a preemptive strike against the Muslims so as not to entertain the future possibility of being attacked when the Muslims are in power or in a position. So here gives the perfect legitimacy to George W. Bush to attack the Muslims.
Well, he got the legitimacy by himself without any provocation from the Muslims.
No, I'm just
actually,
but asking you to consider the consequences.
Yes. A difference should be made between what happened during the life of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and what can happen today. The spreading of the message of Islam in those days couldn't be by any other means except conquering. Today you have television, you have all communications, you can spread the message of Islam. And if you can show an example of political socio-economic system of Islam, that would be the best of propagation.
That's where I wanted you to come. And my question was, is it
regarding
possible?
The life of the Prophet?
Yeah.
We shouldn't distort it.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it possible to establish the socio-economic and political justice without using violence? In other words, is it possible to establish an Islamic social order through democratic, peaceful means?
If by democratic peaceful means you mean elections, etc., my answer is no, not at all. These democratic peaceful means, they are held, elections are held to run a system, not to change the system. The power bases in this society, they will be reflected in the elections. The elections might be very transparent, but the power structure, the landlords, the moneyed people, they will come there and they will try to have a status quo. So actually this is not the way. But I told you that it is not necessary that you go to war. A peaceful agitation, a peaceful mass movement. But for that peaceful mass movement, you need a very strong, integrated, disciplined party, first of all, which can control the mass movement. The mass movement otherwise can be hijacked by any person who raises a louder slogan. Unless you have this backbone of that mass movement is a very strong, disciplined party. Hizbullah, as Quran says it. The party of Allah.
I would like to make one comment about Al-Arab urban dichotomy in early Islam, as well as the urban Bedouin dichotomy in the contemporary Muslim world, a comparative outlook in brief. As you correctly said, the Quran is severely critical of Al-Arab in many of the Quranic verses because originally they disobeyed, etc., etc. But one could say that, one could take that as a lack of harmony in early Islamic Arabia, between urban Islam and non-Islamic desert, so to speak. And that's why Al-Arab were violence was used against them, in a sense, by the urban Muslims to integrate them. But if we look at what we call the Gulf states in the past 50 years, since the beginning of the Cold War at the end of the 1940s, we can see that the Gulf states, because of petroleum, have been integrated into the international capitalist market. And we can see the consequences, where now tribal leaders are in power, and they have been in power for centuries, in the case of Saudi Arabia, since the end of the 18th century. This is true in Jordan. It is the same family, the same tribe. It is true in Egypt, the same tribe or the president. It is true in Morocco. So here the tribes seem, after 14th century of Islamic progress, seem to have overcome their problem of urbanism by controlling the urban side of Islam, so to speak. Do you see what I mean? That initially, urban Muslims attacked the Arab, whereas nowadays the Arab are in power.
They attacked Arab. How?
That the Quran is critical of the Bedouins.
Critical because you know there was lack of training for them.
Right.
The people at Medina, they had the companionship of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Right.
So that is why Quran says that it's not necessary that all the Bedouins should come to Medina to learn Deen. So that was the proposal given by Allah.
I don't disagree with that. But what I'm trying to say is that in the contemporary period, in the past 50 years or so, it is the Arab who have come from the desert, who have overcome urban Islam and who are in control.
It's not Arab, it's oil. It's only oil and nothing else. And then education is widespread. Living in very far off corners, they are getting education.
It's propagating Bedouin philosophy.
Okay.
When you were talking about your second group of jihad, the struggle against the intellectual, where you use argument, the use of the sermon for those who are non-intellectual so you can touch the heart.
Yes.
And then you talked about dialogue for those of other faith traditions in other religions. You talked there about the fact that the goal must be defeat. You use the word defeat, I think, of other religious traditions. And I assume what you mean by that is that because Islam's true, you've got to persuade the Jew, persuade the Christian, persuade the Hindu of the truth of Islam, and in that sense those religions should disappear, and that's fair enough. Is there anywhere in your theology the idea that perhaps God has given to the Christian, to the Hindu, to the Sikh, to the Baha'i, an insight that Muslims can learn from? Is there anything that perhaps Muslims should absorb, much the same way as, you know, Aristotle was used by Al-Ghazali? You know, is there anything that can be used from other traditions to shape their current understanding of what the truth of the world is and God's relations with that world?
First of all, this debate, you know, the third level, I said those people who are paid for this purpose, who they are paid, they are professionals. The missionaries and these, you know, and the Baha'is and Qadianis. So we have to silence them by argument, by debate. They are not going to listen to any argument, etc., etc., but debate, just as AhmadDeath has done. But this is not Dawa. This is not the calling towards Islam. Calling towards Islam is two levels, at the intellectual level, at the common level. The common level, who don't have any false ideology in their minds, sermon will do. But these people who are there to lead people astray, they have to be met in their own elements, and that is debate and proving them to be wrong.
Now, let's just clarify this. So they need to be silenced. People who are paid, like me, as a Christian theologian, should be silenced for leaving other people astray.
Are you a missionary?
Well,
you are like an imam.
No.
An imam can be paid.
Well, just like you.
Sometimes he is not paid.
No, that's right. I don't get paid very much. But just like you, I believe Christianity is true. And you believe Islam's true. And I believe at the end of the age, Muslims will learn that they were mistaken. And you believe at the end of the age, Jesus will tell me that I was mistaken. And at the end of the age, you and I will meet and talk and we'll find out who was right. But we both believe differently. And of course I believe in the truth as I understand it, and you believe in the truth as you understand it. Now, I don't think it's right as a Christian to want to silence people who are proselytizing for Islam. I wouldn't want to do that, because I think that it's very, very important we have a witness in this world to how complicated matters of faith are and the mystery of the divine. And I think God intended religious diversity for that reason. So therefore I would never talk about silencing people who are trying to convert people to Islam. In fact, I would welcome them, and I would encourage them to welcome me and others who want to, and you know, and as part of the excitement of God's world. But you don't see it like that at all, is that right?
Let me give you an example. Father Fender came to India just after the Britishers had conquered India. And he challenged all the ulama, Muslim ulama, and held debates in various cities, starting from Calcutta and all, you know, this UP, if you know somewhat of India. And then he reached Delhi. That was the capital. And there, standing on the stairs of the great mosque, he challenged all the ulama of India, come and argue with me. I have defeated all the ulama, starting from Calcutta, coming to Delhi. If there was no one to challenge him, the majority of the Muslims of India would have converted to Christianity. They didn't know anything. But seeing that a Christian father, a learned person, has defeated our ulama. So to stop this thing, what happened? One person came up, Rahmatullah Kairanvi. He defeated him. And then he ran away from Indian subcontinent. He started his mission in Turkey. And there also the ulama were defeated. But it was the caliphate till that time. So there was a request to Rahmatullah, send Rahmatullah to Turkey so that he can silence this person here. And when he came to know that Rahmatullah Karanvi is coming to Turkey, he ran from there also. So what are the influences of the people, of the general masses? They are not very knowledgeable. How many percent of people in India could read and understand Quran for themselves? They had faith in their Maulvis. And if the Maulvis stand defeated, what would be the psychological effect? But thank Allah that there was a person.
May I
read in Makkah.
See, again, when we are talking of these things, we still, as Nirmal Saab said, within the context where Muslims are in majority, and you are creating some problems for a person, Muslim like me, who is living in the United States. You want complete freedom to silence the Christian missionaries or other non-Muslim missionaries here in Pakistan. But you want complete freedom for me to propagate Islam in the United States and not to be silenced by them. So that creates a contradiction.
No, they tried to silence AhmadDeath, but were defeated.
Who decides who has been defeated?
When there's an argument and there's a meeting, things is decided. They were silenced. What was the name of that person, you know, who was later on?
Jimmy Swaggart?
Yes. Jimmy Swaggart was defeated.
My question is about Muslim and Mu'min. And what I'm trying to sort of comprehend here is that Mu'min is a person who, I suppose, who is developed or evolved in Iman and whose kirdar is such that it justifies that way. Now, in this whole process of jihad or struggle of various kinds, struggle for living, struggle for rights, and struggle for spreading ideology, various levels of struggle which are there. Eventually, all struggles are triggered, inspired, supported, and led by some people. And I want to try and understand this, that how do I recognize a Mu'min?
How do you recognize
a Mu'min? How do I recognize that somebody who is leading is a Mu'min and not self-professed Mu'min, but the real one? Because really speaking, a Mu'min is the real Musliman. He's a godly person. He is honest, he is compassionate, he has got the goodness of humanity and God's creation in heart, and he is in love with he's in adoration.
These are the attributes of a Mu'min, not a Muslim.
Mu'min.
Yes,
I'm talking Muslim. And therefore, he is, I would say in common parlance, he is really the true Muslim. The definition of Muslim is, hey, be a Mu'min, then only you can be called a Musliman. Now, how do I recognize that person? How do I find him? Because he's the one who can possibly help me, who can guide me.
His character, his behavior.
But I'm telling you,
because for the purpose of this world, we don't need to decide. Only thing is Muslim. The membership of the society is on Islam, I told you, from the very beginning, not Iman. Because we cannot pass any judgment about Iman of anybody, whether he has it or not. So that the whole socio-political structure is based on Islam. Or you may call it legal Islam. This is legal Iman. Because we have an ayah in Quran in Surah An-Nisa, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu aminu billahi wa rasul. Oh, you who profess to be Mu'mins, have real Iman in Allah and His messengers and His books. So a legal Iman is Islam, verbal attestation. He might not be practicing. He might not be saying 5 prayers, not even 1 prayer. But if he believes that prayer is a part of Islamic Sharia, he is accepted as a Muslim.
Last question from Dr. Faris.
Yeah, I just want to be enlightened. myself about statement وَمَا عَلَى الرَّسُولِ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغِ. So how we can now tie with this statement and that we are going to establish.
هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله.
Yeah, but
Thrice for Prophet Muhammad. It is he, that is Allah, who has sent his messenger, that is Muhammad, with two things: the full guidance, the total guidance, al-huda, and the dinul haq, the true system, political, socio-economic system, dinul haq.
But it's not mentioned political, socio-political, economic.
Dinul haq, deen is nizam. The difference between mazhab and deen.
But that is interpretation to me. Yeah.
No. For example, we have in Surah Yusuf, Deen al-Malik. What does it mean? Ma kana liyakhudha akhahu fi Deen al-Malik. What does it mean?
Because to convey the message is something else.
No.
To establish it is something else.
Joseph wanted to retain his brother Binyamin with him in Egypt.
Yeah.
He couldn't do it. According to the law of the king. He was not the king. The king was the person who had seen the dream. So either it is the deen of king, Deen al-Malik, or it is deen of Allah. يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. And Islam is deen, not mazhab only. So actually to make that deen supreme over the whole of this system was the basic purpose of the advent of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So
we must conclude now.